Welcome to the Explainer. When you think about it, all big ideas start with a question, right? Well, today we're going to dive into this fascinating 50-year-old debate from the world of academic research, a debate that really makes you rethink what kinds of questions we should be asking. And trust me, it has consequences for all of us.
All right, so to really get this, we gotta hop in the time machine and go back about 50 years. Because that's when this really powerful and kind of wild idea popped up. It was a concept that totally flipped the script on what makes a theory great.
So check this out. Back in 1971, a sociologist named Murray S. Davis dropped this bombshell of an idea. He basically said, hey, you know what makes a theorist great? It's not that their theories are true, it's that they're interesting. The big, famous theories, the ones that stick around, aren't always the ones that are factually correct, but the ones that make us stop and question everything we thought was true.
And Davis even had a formula for it. The magic ingredient for an interesting theory is to take something everyone just assumes is true, call it X, and then argue that it's actually the complete opposite. It's all about that moment where people go, whoa, I never thought about it like that before.
And this wasn't some little idea that faded away. Nope. It became a cult classic. It was made required reading in business schools all over the world. So you have a whole generation of researchers being taught that the secret to making a name for yourself is to find something, anything, that's surprising and counterintuitive.
But, and this is a big but, what happens when that hunt for interesting goes a little too far? What's the downside when being clever is prized more than being, helpful? Well, you fall into a trap.
And this slide really gets to the heart of it. It shows you the huge difference between a question that's just, clever, and one that's genuinely important. You could ask something interesting like, hey, are abusive bosses actually good parents at home? It's a provocative thought experiment. But the important question is, how do we get rid of workplace abuse altogether? See the difference? One's a puzzle, the other is a mission to solve a real-world problem. And when you're just chasing interesting, you can run into some serious problems. You get studies that have almost zero practical use, or research that just helps companies make a quick buck. It can even lead to some pretty sketchy science, like HARKing. That's a fancy term for making up your theory after you see the results, and it's why you see so many of these flashy studies that nobody can ever seem to replicate.
Okay, so if being interesting isn't the be-all and end-all, what's the alternative? Well, a lot of people in the field are now pushing for a major shift in thinking. And that alternative is to focus on research that is important. And what does that mean? It's not about shock value. It's about having the potential to actually solve real problems, to make life better for people, and to think about the kind of world we're leaving for the next generation.
And this is why this whole debate is so incredibly crucial. These theories, they don't just stay locked up in some academic journal. They can become self-fulfilling prophecies. They get into textbooks, they're taught in business schools, and they literally shape how the next generation of managers and leaders think and act. Just think about this for a second. A lot of the big management ideas we still use every day are over 40 years old. They were created for the problems of a totally different time. And after going through things like the Great Recession, it's pretty obvious we need some fresh thinking for today's problems. So this begs the question, right? If doing important research is so, important, why do so many people still get caught in that interestingness trap? The answer, it turns out, isn't really about the individual researchers. It's about the system they're stuck in. There are these really powerful forces, these incentives, that are constantly pushing them away from tackling the big, messy, important stuff. And this table breaks it down perfectly. The academic world, it often rewards you for pumping out lots of surprising papers, not one big, important one. Getting data? It's way easier to do a quick, cheap test of some quirky idea. And the media? Oh, they absolutely love a wild, counterintuitive headline. The whole system is basically set up to make researchers avoid those big, messy, expensive projects that could actually make a difference. But just seeing the problem, just acknowledging it exists, that's the first step. So what's next? How do we actually start building a new road, one that leads to research that truly matters?
Well, the proposed path forward is all about changing the rules of the game. First, you have to change what it means to be a productive researcher. Then, you've got to actively reward the people who are brave enough to tackle huge societal problems. And maybe most importantly, we all have to learn to be a lot more patient and support those really complex long-haul projects that these kinds of problems require. When you boil it all down, it's really a choice between two totally different ways of looking at the world. The interesting path often leads to this conclusion. Hey, that problem you thought was solvable? Turns out it's actually impossible. But the important path dares to say, you know that problem that seems impossible? We might actually be able to solve it. It's really that simple. Are we in the business of finding interesting problems, or are we in the business of finding important solutions? And while the first one can be a fun intellectual exercise, the second one, that's the one that actually moves us all forward. So that leaves us with this one big final question to chew on. Our world is just packed with challenges, right? From our own workplaces to the biggest global crises. So where should we point our most powerful tool, our collective curiosity? Which questions are really, truly worth answering?